Hello, and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, but please call me Alex, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by guest Ryan Boggs. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Alex.
So, for those who don't know you or are meeting you for the first time, could you share a bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Like you said, my name is Ryan Boggs. I am currently a solutions architect at Arkus, a Salesforce consultant. But I started my career in the conservation field and have worked for conservation organizations like the Nature Conservancy, very large ones, down to very small ones like local land trusts, and have found my path to the nonprofit side of Salesforce through that. And for the past, I guess it's been about 8 months, have been focused on consulting for Salesforce full time with Arkus.
And forgive my ignorance, but is most conservation companies considered to be nonprofits, or is it a B-type corporation? How do you define a conservation company?
So all the conservation organizations that I worked for were nonprofits, and a lot of them are. There are some, groups that are like the state wildlife agencies or the federal Forest Service, which are conservation oriented, but are governmental in nature. But all the ones that I have worked for are in the nonprofit space.
And then how did you get started working in that space? Was it just an opportunity that you applied for? Was there a certain attraction to it that you couldn't resist?
I think it goes all the way back to as a kid. I think it was my aunt bought me a subscription to Ranger Rick, the magazine that was all about wildlife. And so, every month when that would come, I would be so excited to read about all the wildlife stuff. Ended up going to college to get a degree in wildlife biology. And so from, the day after I graduated from college, I got an internship with the Nature Conservancy as an intern at a nature preserve where I got to live the whole summer. And that was it was really living that dream of working outside and spending all the time in the field with critters and, that kind of thing. But the reality of it is that you end up needing to work with people, which means you work in an office and you do office stuff. And so the reality of conservation work gives up to the reality of being tied to a desk most of the time. So that's how I ended up in the conservation sphere.
So I imagine that most of the challenges that a typical nonprofit would have, the conservation company would as well, right? Is there any specific technology difference between a conservation company and a typical nonprofit?
Probably not. If you were to look at it at a very macro scale, probably not. It feels like there is. Every nonprofit feels like they're very unique and special. The reality is that every nonprofit exists to serve a mission and to do something good in the world. And so, the database or the structure to do that is the same for everybody. You're trying to measure what you're doing. Every nonprofit has to raise money. I think that's the biggest challenge for most nonprofits, is raising enough money to succeed in their mission, to pay for the people or to pay for the land protection or whatever it is that they need to pay for. It's all in that fundraising thing. So it all works out to be about the same thing in terms of the nonprofits, and really just how you go about structuring it and it's building it is slightly different, but it all boils down to the same thing.
There's something alluring about conservation in the sense of working outside. I find that, as tech guys as we are, working in front of a computer all the time, I really connect strongly with nature. I really find that I can recharge my batteries very quickly in a short amount of time just by being in nature, camping, being by a stream or a river. So I imagine that was a lot of that kind of regeneration that you were able to do while you were on site.
Yeah, it's been interesting making the shift to being, purely in the tech world, because I was in that place of, in my early days of being out in the field every day, taking people for hikes, doing naturalist walks with people, taking groups of volunteers out to do weed management or fence management or all the different things that you need to do maintenance on the land at the nature preserves. Transitioning to a place where you're just behind a computer all the time is a different thing. it's been very, very interesting to personally make that shift of like, okay, I need to make sure that I plan for my time off to have that regeneration, because I don't. It's not built into my job anymore, which is very strange, because it used to be so much a part of my life that it naturally happened, but not anymore. And so I find myself in a place where, like right now, I'm speaking to you from my basement in my house, which has very little natural light. And, that's a challenge in my, coming from a world of being outside a lot. And this summer, my job, one of my tasks I'm building myself is to build an office that actually has a window so I can see natural light for that just basic daily regeneration. But then spending the time outdoors is really important as well.
Yeah, got to make that time. So how did you shift then from being out in the field to start working more in the office, specifically with Arkus? Could you tell us, for example, what you do at Arkus and what does Arkus do in general as a Salesforce partner?
Yeah. So the shift that I made was actually quite a long time ago when I got interested in the world of Salesforce. And that was when I was at a nonprofit that I was the executive director of. It was a small nonprofit, a small land trust here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And we had a homebrew access database that really didn't tell us anything. It could print renewal letters, and that was about it. And so we were very small, didn't have much money. And so I knew that I needed a donor database if I was going to raise money for this organization. And I went out looking, and Salesforce was free for small nonprofits, and it's a wonderful gift that they give of the 10 free licenses of the enterprise version for nonprofits. And so I dove into that and said, wow, free is the right price. And figured out how to do the migration of the data from our Access database to Salesforce, and like very, very quickly saw, wow, this is an unbelievable product. There's so much that can be done, and it's free for nonprofits. I keep saying free because it was a very small organization. We didn't have two dimes to rub together. So it was really, really important that the solution be very cheap. But I kind of got into the Salesforce world because of that. And through working at other organizations where we used Salesforce, I spent a lot of time in Salesforce and became a Salesforce administrator. And I also started doing consulting with other nonprofits just because people that I worked with had moved on to other organizations. And those organizations use Salesforce, and they were struggling with their Salesforce. They didn't know how to use it. They didn't have anybody who could help them configure it. And so the folks who had moved on to those other organizations knew about the work that I did at the organization we worked together. And so they asked me if I could help them. And so I started this kind of side consulting business and ended up consulting for a few different organizations, some of them short term, some of them, long term, all the way up until I joined Arkus. And I got to where I really enjoyed the consulting, and I really enjoyed empowering nonprofits with this incredibly powerful platform, giving them the ability to do the kind of complex tracking and data management that they needed to do. And so, as I was at my day job in my last conservation job, I was looking at my day, and I was excited for 5 o'clock to come, not so I could stop working, but so that I could get to my consulting work. And as I started, I started to think maybe this consulting thing is what I should be doing full time. And so I kind of looked around, and Arkus was my number one choice of a place to go because of the culture there and the way that it focuses. Most of the clients at Arkus are nonprofits, and so I decided that I could do a lot more good in the world by helping a lot more nonprofits by being in the consulting space full time. So I made the jump to Arkus, and Arkus is a Salesforce partner. And is a great example of, I think, what every consulting partner should be in terms of the methodologies and the approach that we take with clients, which is really a partnership in building a long-term sustainable organization in their Salesforce org. And so, I can genuinely say that the clients that I work with on a daily basis become friends, and we become partners in their success. And, they aren't this client they become more than clients, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we become partners in helping them achieve their mission. And that's a really, really rewarding thing. And it's one of the most rewarding things I've done in my career.
Speaking a bit more about the attraction of working as a consultant, I felt it as well, where once you find your they call it the flow, when you're doing the thing that you should be doing in life, that you're just feeling the movement, you're feeling the flow of energy. You don't notice time passing very quickly. You feel like you're delivering something. You see the benefits of your results. Like that is if you can find that in life, it's amazing. So it's awesome that you were able to find it.
Yeah.
And it's surprising, maybe not so surprising because I have a podcast about it. But I have noticed a lot of Salesforce consultants in the nonprofit space have that same kind of feeling, that once they land in that nonprofit space, like that they say, okay, this is it. This is really where I want to be. Speaking toward, like you said, the partnerships more than clients. This is a common theme that I keep on hearing, and I love it. It gives me even more joy to hear that, because it's something that I can share with and appreciate as well.
Yeah.
So I noticed about Arkus is that they are you said they focused on nonprofits, but they also focused on a particular aspect of nonprofits, and that's the social change part. Can you speak more about how did that come about? Is it there was just more clients in social change that approached Arkus, or was Arkus positioning themselves as the social change nonprofit Salesforce expert?
I'm not sure about that entirely. I think that social change is one of the largest sectors in the nonprofit sphere. And so, I think it's kind of a natural part of it. Also, Arkus is based in New York City, and New York City has a lot of those kind of organizations. So I can't really speak to that all that much.
One of the things I also noticed is that there was recently a pro bono day where when Arkus offered some consulting sessions for free to nonprofits. Do you know anything about that, or were you involved in that? Could you speak a bit more about how that unfolded?
Yeah, it's a really fun thing, and we had that at the very beginning of May this year, and it was really fun to join that effort because it was the first time that I had met anybody from Arkus. After being here for 8 months, I was hired during the pandemic with virtual meetings and such, and then I joined. And we did everything virtually, but we got all the Arkies together at the beginning of May for a all company meeting in New York City. And as part of that, we had our pro bono day, which was really fun, where we had a series of presentations done by Arkus employees. We call them Arkies, like I said, for the morning about topics that seem to be relevant in today's world. And the pro bono days are targeted towards organizations using Salesforce or those who are thinking about using Salesforce. Then in the afternoon, we had these pro bono sessions where people could basically sign up for a few hour slot of free consulting time. And I was lucky enough to sign up for a session with some folks from an organization based in New York City. And they were having some struggles around reporting, and they couldn't get the reports done that they wanted to do. And it was like so many Salesforce admins, they were an accidental admin. They didn't go to school to become a Salesforce admin or a data manager in any way, shape, or form. And as they were describing what their challenge was, I was able to point them. It's a very simple, basic thing, but it's something that opens up the world. I was able to point them to custom report types in Salesforce, and it changed everything. They're like, oh, well, we can create these reports that generate, that can pull data from these different objects, and I get to create those and do that work. And I know how to do that now. So it was one of those things where it was really rewarding for me to share that bit of knowledge that I wish that somebody had been able to share with me at the very beginning of my Salesforce career with this person. They had this long list of reports that they wanted to do, but when I showed them the custom report types, they said, "Oh, okay, well, I can do all these. Now let's go on to these other things." So it was a really fun time. And if anybody is ever around New York City when we hold these things, or I think there's tentative plans to do these in other places. They're a lot of fun, and I encourage you to come if you can.
I love the expression. If you show a man, if you show a person how to fish, they'll fish. No, if you give a man a fish, they'll eat well for the day. If you teach them how to fish, they'll eat well for the rest of their life. So just showing them how to use, like you said, the custom report types empowers them, and then they can go off and do it on their own. And that light switch that you see above their head and that smile that you see, I think is so rewarding. It's part of that experience about being a Salesforce consultant.
So much fun.
So there was a topic you kind of basically just scratched that I wanted to dig a bit further, and that was taking a Microsoft Access database, their old CRM from an old organization, and moving it into Salesforce. And the whole concept, the whole topic of legacy migrations, moving from an old system to Salesforce, is something that's very interesting to me as well. And I know that there is I don't know if it's a trend or maybe it's just my personal anecdotal experience, but I have seen a few nonprofits these days moving more towards older systems or from older systems to Salesforce. How do you normally start a conversation with a nonprofit that is looking to do this? Like, there's obviously a lot of pitfalls, and we'll get to all the details of it in a moment, but just at a high level, what does that conversation look like from the start?
Yeah, it's really interesting because sometimes folks, have already decided that they want to move to a different platform, or they've already decided they've chosen Salesforce as their target, where they want to move to. Oh, before I joined Arkus, when I was doing my side consulting, I did several consulting gigs around helping people choose a new platform to work in, and sometimes they would come to me, and the way that I would do it would be to basically gather requirements. What is it that you need to be able to do in your new system? And then we would talk about, what they had thoughts about what the good choices for them were. I knew Salesforce, so I would, kind of throw Salesforce into the mix. And then we would kind of talk through what would make sense as a CRM for folks. And, I'll be honest, there were times where I would talk to very small organizations and Salesforce was not right for them. And something like Little Green Light was exactly what they needed, because they needed something that would take no maintenance and that had everything on the basic fundraising ready to go for them. And then there were other folks where it was really important for them to be able to integrate program related data. So whether it was the lands that they were conserving or the hearts and minds that they were changing, whatever it was, they need to be able to integrate that into their fundraising platform. And that's where Salesforce really shined. And that's so in cases where we had these kind of requirements, Salesforce was a really obvious choice. And then making sure that they had the ability to maintain it over time. Because, you've probably heard the expression of Salesforce is free, like kittens are free, right? It's just the beginning of that world in terms of maintaining it and growing it in a responsible way. It's not simple. It takes a lot of effort to keep going. So making sure that clients had that ability and that desire to have something that was going to need that kind of maintenance was an important step. But, after we get the decision made, then we go into kind of that migration process. And, there's another part of that, which is where you look at, okay, what do you really need your system to do in a much more granular process? And then being able to map the data and then migrate the data is kind of the big steps that we would take.
I actually haven't heard that expression about the kittens, but it's a good one. I think I might adopt it.
Yeah, it's Salesforce is free like kittens is one that is classic to me, because it's just the beginning of a long relationship.
Absolutely. So at a high level, when would you recommend Salesforce, or when would you not recommend Salesforce and another CRM? Like, what would the high level criteria be to say this may be a good choice or this may not be a good choice?
Yeah, I think my biggest hinge point on that decision is really whether or not there is kind of an organizational desire to have a very, very powerful database. And from that organizational desire and philosophy would flow the funds to do that. Because, like, to come back to the kittens thing, when you get kittens, that means you have to feed them every day and you have to provide for their vet care. You have to have these ongoing costs, even though the kittens themselves were free. Salesforce itself is free, the first 10 licenses at least. But there is going to be ongoing costs, and if the organization is willing to dedicate funds towards that is a really important part of that. There's also a part that I'm looking for, which is there somebody within that organization who has the desire or the want, the curiosity to dive into the world of Salesforce, because it's huge. There's an entire, you and I have built careers on this one software as a service platform. There has to be somebody with the desire to learn this stuff within that organization. Because if an organization is completely dependent upon a consultant, it's going to have a challenge. And so is there somebody internally who's going to grab something and own it? And if they are, and if there is somebody who wants to do that, then it's going to be a natural thing to move towards that Salesforce side of it.
And you mentioned that in some cases they come to you and they already know they want to go to Salesforce, and sometimes they know there's something else. They're having issues with their current system, or they're lost along the way. Maybe they think they need modifications to their existing system, and then the result ends up being, it's a better choice for you to move to Salesforce. Like, when would you recommend doing a migration at all versus staying with what they have and just making that better?
I think it comes down to that requirements gathering, where we would look at, okay, what is it that you really want to be able to do? And what does your roadmap look like? What do you want to be able to do in the future? And how much is your system costing you now? And so, we look at those things and we say, does the roadmap lead towards, or does your current platform, is it going to let you do what you need to do all the way? Or are you going to have to move later on to be able to follow your roadmap? And, I will usually suggest an earlier departure to Salesforce if the roadmap in the future at all looks like Salesforce is going, or the kind of requirements are going to be something that only Salesforce could handle. I think migrations are really, really challenging, and they are not to be taken lightly. And so if an organization can meet their needs and those needs aren't going to change and grow in the future, I never want to spend an organization's money to do a migration without, if there isn't a really big need for it. That said, I think Salesforce is the best platform out there for organizations that do need to raise money and manage their programs in the same platform. And managing programs within the same platform has huge benefits to it. It's very frequent that clients to human services agencies or organizations become donors. And that is a transition that is very clunky in an organization that doesn't have those kind of the connections between programs and the fundraising side of it. So I never want to waste a client's money, but the benefits can be huge for a migration that is well planned.
I have this sense that data migrations are one of the most complicated components of moving to a new system, because setting up Salesforce, for example, adding all the extra functionality, the personalization, the automation, that's usually more or less straightforward, at least for the nonprofit space. But once you start dealing with data, I know that there are certain agencies out there, partners of Salesforce, that won't even touch data migration, that it becomes a can of worms. accuracy becomes a problem, cleansing becomes a problem, duplications. Like there's a lot of pitfalls that need to be avoided along the way. There are a lot of challenges to make this happen. So from your perspective, what would you say are some, two or three really important criteria that needs to be followed in order for a migration to be successful?
I think that it's really important for the client and the partner to approach a migration as a long-term project and a project that is very much done in partnership. I think sometimes it feels from the client side like just take all our data and put it from one system to another. And the reality is that it's a bit different. And I use the analogy of a migration from one org to another can be thought of like moving house, right? You're moving from one house to another, and you almost never want to take everything from your old house and put it in your new house, right? Otherwise, why would you move house? You often want to take that opportunity to streamline things, to improve things, to have, you want your new house to be less cluttered. You want your new house to be more representative of what you want your life to be like. And so, building a new org, a new Salesforce org is kind of like, you work with your contractor to build a house that really meets your needs, that is exactly what you need it to be, instead of just a carbon copy of the house that you had before. And so, that partnership and building that is really important to take the time to go through and really develop your needs so that when you do make that jump, you're kind of moving into your new dream house instead of, just a copy or a facsimile of what your organization used to be. I think it's also a really great time to shed technical debt. All the old legacy processes, the things that used to work in a certain way, they don't really work anymore. And so it'd be better just to leave them in the past. And so, when you're moving house, you're packing up boxes, right? And you don't just take everything out of your dressers and out of your closet, pack it up, right? You want to take some of that stuff and you might want to put it in storage somewhere, off-site or in your basement, or in places where you don't need access to it all the time. And then there's a lot of stuff you just don't need, right? You put it out on the curb, you take it to Goodwill. And a good data migration really is a simplification of the data and the amount of data that comes over. So being willing to put in the time, understanding what data you need to migrate versus what can be left or what can be kind of put into long-term cold storage is a really valuable step in the process.
Yeah, I love the analogy. Not only moving houses, but first building your dream house and then moving into it. I think that's a great analogy. The flip side, then, what would be some pitfalls that you want to make sure or you would mention in advance to say, this is what we definitely do not want to do?
Yeah, I think the biggest one that we see constantly is duplication of data. There's so many ways that data comes into an org, and it's very easy for bad data to be brought over. And so, making sure that data is clean before it comes over. And as consultants, we can only do so much data cleaning because there's so much of it that is it's unique to, an individual, the contact within the organization, and understanding those contacts to understand whether the data needs to be migrated or not. So, those are really important things for clients to be able to do, is to take the time to look at the data and really understand it well enough to understand what should or should not be brought over.
So if I were to rephrase that, would you agree that we have limited capacity as consultants? We can do cleaning, and I agree that 80-20 rule kind of falls into play here. But it sounds like the nonprofit organization can't expect just to hand over the data and say, here it is, you guys clean it, dedupe it, do whatever, and then stick it into Salesforce. It sounds like it's more of a partnership where they need to take ownership of some of the activities to prepare it in some format that's a bit more digestible, and then we take the responsibility of transforming it to what really Salesforce needs. Would you agree with that, or do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. You said it much better than I did. Yeah, there's levels, like you said, levels at which we can take data and smooth it, but it really does boil down to the clients, the nonprofits being able to understand what's there and move the good stuff. Tell us what the good stuff is so that we can move it for them.
I've noticed in the past a few other issues that are typical, and that is the amount of data, is how far back a data you want to bring over. How do you normally broach that topic and solve for it, I should say, too?
That's a tough one because, I think everybody has their own personalities. And I think those people who are pack rats in their own life tend to be pack rats in their data. And they want to bring everything they possibly can. And there are those people who are much more minimalists, and, they are much less likely to say, we need to know every phone call that was made to every donor 20 years ago, and that data needs to be brought over. But then there's also roles, right? If you are the director of a development at a nonprofit, you might want to know every phone call that was made to a donor 20 years ago, because it informs your ability to interact with that person, and having that information is extremely valuable to you. And, I think there's always those things where we have to look at the limitations of our systems, right? I recently did a data migration where, it had 1.5 million accounts in their org. And, if you open a spreadsheet with 1.5 million rows, Excel just says, no, you can't do that. And so you have to use really advanced tools. And so when you have those kind of data sets, the conversation is like, okay, we can bring all these over. It means we're going to have to use extract, transform, load tool, an ETL tool that might cost money to do that. And that's going to be part of it. Do you really want to do this? Or can we select a subset of these accounts, because only, let's say, only 50% of these accounts have had a donation or any kind of interaction with your organization in the last 10 years. And so really it's a conversation where we say, the reality is we can move everything. It's just going to cost a lot more if we have to move all of these things. And, if a client says yes, then we can do that. We try to make sure that we give them the reality of it. It's like, okay, we'll move these, but what are you going to do with these 10, let's say there's 20,000 accounts in an organization that have no contacts, have no opportunities. There really isn't any data in there about them other than their name and, a few basic data points, but there's not really anything there. So what are you going to do with all of these things? And if they say, well, these are our prospects, or this is an important thing, then that makes sense. But oftentimes when we raise the reality of it, that there's all this data in here that isn't doing anything for you, it becomes quickly apparent that it's not necessary. And I think one of the challenges with data that folks have is that it's invisible, right? If you have a house and the mover comes in and says, well, this is going to take 3 moving trucks to move the stuff. You're like, oh, I don't want to pay for 3 moving trucks. I'm going to get rid of a bunch of stuff. But when it's a data set, it's much more difficult to see that kind of the bulk of the data, right? You don't see necessarily that it's 3 moving trucks. You just see it's just the accounts. So that shouldn't be a problem, right? So if you can bring forward that kind of size analogy, then I think it helps people to make decisions around what should and should not be brought over.
Yeah, the way that I approach that is I remind them that by working or being on Salesforce, it is a shared platform, right? You're on a cloud. You are using a server somewhere in the cloud, and that server has limitations in terms of data storage. And yes, you can bring over those 3 trucks of data, but you might actually have to pay for a storage locker on the side, an extra charge monthly that Salesforce will charge you just to keep that data. And that kind of conversation, when you bring it back to money to say, yeah, sure, we can bring in over those million records, but you're gonna pay X dollars per month more just to have them sit there. That helps the conversation, I find.
Yeah. I think the other one that's really interesting within Salesforce world is the archived tasks that, you can't see these tasks. Salesforce automatically archives tasks after 6 months. And you can't see them, but they do still count against your data quota, your data limits. And so, that's one that we talk to our clients about. It's like, well, you can't see these. So we probably don't want to bring them. And they quickly say, oh, yes, we don't want to bring those because it's like the locker that you don't have a key to that you have to pay for.
So other than data migration, let's talk about feature migration. Usually when you move from a legacy system, you're used to doing things in a certain way. There's a process we could talk about, but there's also automations and things that happen behind the scenes. How do you tackle that when it comes to working with Salesforce? Because obviously the two systems are not going to be the same. Salesforce has its way of doing things, and there might be hundreds of processes in the old system which you may need to only bring over a few of them. Like, how do you handle that kind of functionality aspect of a data migration, or of a legacy migration, I should say?
I think right now is kind of an opportune time to really assess the automations within an organization, and especially with the deprecation in the future of process builder and workflow rules. And so, the way that I approach with clients, especially clients that have been around for a while, is taking a look at all of the automations. We'll, as part of the data mapping that we do, we'll create a tab that lists all the process automations. And in almost every migration I've ever done, we leave at least half of the old automations in the org without reproducing them, and really focus on the new ones, the ones that we want to bring over, and then migrating them. And most often it's workflow rules into flows, which is how Salesforce is really pushing us to do that. And it's been fun to do because in a lot of cases, the clients' admins have not, an admin in a nonprofit is almost always doing admin as a second part of their job. It's very rarely does a nonprofit have a dedicated admin. And so they've been learning along the way, and they taught themselves workflow rules back when workflow rules were the way to go. And now that we're moving away from that in Process Builder, there's a kind of an intimidation factor of learning a new tool like Flow, which, up until a couple of years ago was really, really difficult to use and very intimidating. I know that I took 4 or 5 good hard runs at Flow before in old versions, before it matured to the point at which I could use it, because it was just so complicated. And one of the strategies that I've used with clients, admins, is to use the automation migrations as a chance for them to understand flows, because it's actually easier to create a flow to replicate the parts of a workflow rule in Flow than it is as a workflow rule. And so what I have done in different cases is I will basically just rebuild a workflow rule as a flow and show the client that, and use it as an example and say, okay, here's this one. There's a process that you understand really well. And this is what it looks like in Flow. And almost every single person I've done this with have said, oh, I get Flow now. I didn't understand it, but now that I have this process that I understand, and now I can see it laid out in Flow, it totally makes sense. And then we negotiate back and forth about, like, okay, do you want to now take the rest of your automations and build them as flows? Do you want me to do that? Do you want to split that? How do you want to handle that? And most of the time they'll take a few of them and then they'll say, okay, I get it now. Go ahead and do the rest of them. And so it's been the transitioning of the migration from one org to another, or from Salesforce to another Salesforce, or from another organization into Salesforce, can be a great opportunity to train people in these new processes. So we kind of run these in a way that helps the new admins really get their hands around these new automation tools.
Yeah, Flow in its early phases was really unpleasant to work with. I'm so happy they made some major advances in it, and now it's like incredible. In every release, it gets better and better. So, but it can be challenging. You're right. It's more powerful, and therefore you need to have a little more confidence in using it. But it's definitely the way to go going forward. Obviously, in terms of process, then, because more the outside of the technical aspects, more non-technical stuff. Various teams within nonprofits will be used to doing certain things a certain way, and then going into their CRM, playing around with it, and then doing other things outside the CRM. Do you normally handle the process side of things to say, okay, here's the new way that you're going to be using the system, or is that usually done from another team?
I think in a perfect world, you would have the ability to look at the entire process, and that is one that I kind of nerd out around the process of things. And I love tools that help to map processes. Like Elements.cloud is one that I just fell in love with the first time I used it, because it allowed us to take incredibly complex processes and map them at a very high level, and then be able to drill down with more and more details, so that you could map a donation processing process. You could map it at four steps, like get donation, put donation in Salesforce, thank the donor, and then cultivate the donor. You could have that as the 4-level process, but each of those processes could be drilled down into with really, really fine detail. You could go 10 levels deep and have a lot of really good information. And I think one of the challenges that I see regularly in the nonprofit space, especially, is having well-defined processes that are, it's more of a make things up as you go along, and be flexible in the processes, as opposed to the way that I like to think about it is that, we should take things that can be very standard, like the way that we process a donation probably should be very standardized. And let's save our creativity for places where we need to be creative to solve problems. If you're in a human services agency, thinking creatively about, like, a client has a specific problem, how can I help them? Or in the conservation world, we have a global climate crisis. How are we going to solve that? That's where we need to focus our creativity, not on, reinventing the wheel around the basic ways of business processes. So, tools like Elements.cloud can be really helpful in that. And just establishing processes can be that our tools like Salesforce can support is really valuable for the longevity of an organization.
Yeah, because obviously Salesforce is just a tool, right? And you need to be able to know how to use the tool properly. You wouldn't want to use a hammer to screw in a screw or a nail. I guess you would for a nail, but not the screw. So,
well, one thing that you just said there, Alex, I think is really important. And this is what I tell all of my clients at the beginning, is that if Salesforce isn't a tool that helps you to get your work done, then it isn't working. It isn't a place to just record a donation that came in. It should be the tool that helped you to get that donation in the beginning. And that's really, as a partner, we are successful if Salesforce is a tool that does that for our clients.
That's well said. Once this migration is complete, or a typical migration is complete, you move the client from whatever CRM they came from, whether it was a legacy system or another Salesforce org, and now they moved into their shiny new house. What do you normally see afterwards? Like, what are the initial reactions, either positive or negative? And what would a nonprofit typically need to make sure that they properly adjust to their new world, I guess, a new house.
That's very interesting. I'm going through that process right now with several clients. And I think one of the most important thing is that you don't want to present the new house to the clients or the new org to the clients on the day that we go live, right? You want them to have seen the house as it's being built and understand how the systems work, how things are going or how things will need to go. And, my goal is always to make a transition as simple as possible. If we're moving from one Salesforce org to another, like from Illuminate CRM into NPSP, we would try to maintain page layouts to be as similar as they can, so that looks the same, but making sure that they get trained on how gift entry works in the new nonprofit success pack as opposed to how it worked in Illuminate CRM. But what I'm trying to say is that I think it's important to bring your clients along the way. And so that when you go live, the new version they understand it. They know how it works. It shouldn't be the new shiny present that's opened on the day of go live. It should be something that they've been trained in and understand all the way along, and that they have ownership of. What I'll often do is build. We'll still be in the build phase in their new org, and I'll build the account page layout, and I'll ask the client to go look at that and ask for feedback and say. They'll say, "Oh, I'd really like the details tab to be the default tab that it lands on," and so I'll make that change. And all of those things allow them to have ownership over that build process, and that really helps to get that buy-in. And it might just be the admin, or in a perfect world, it's a bunch of users as well. So those users have the ability to, or have had input in what the page layout should look like, or what the automations should do. And so when they go in and they are actually working in it, it feels like old hat. It is the way that it should be, the thing that they've always wanted, right? It's it should solve, won't solve all the problems, but in a perfect world, it would be, all the things they used to complain about their old system are solved in the new system, and they've had a hand in that all the way along.
I would totally agree. I think ownership is one of the key elements for success. I've seen situations where the nonprofit just says, "Here, build it for us," and then when it's finished built, they walk in and they make it's almost too late to make adjustments because the house is built. And if you want to move walls around, for example, to continue this analogy, it becomes a lot more difficult when it's built, after it's built, as opposed to as it's being designed. But ownership, and making sure that they maintain ownership, because at the end of the day, at one moment in time, we as consultants might move away from the organization. They're going to have to be self-sufficient, at least to a certain point, and make sure that they know what they are going to get, and really take responsibility for that.
Yeah, I think it's one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits face. And I've been in this situation where you hire a consultant to do some work, and there isn't the right kind of communication about that work, and then that work is not understood at the level at which it needs to be understood by the organization, and something goes wrong in the future, and there's just nobody knows how to do anything to fix it, and all too often it just gets abandoned. That entire functionality gets abandoned, and it's a part of the world that I wish we could not let happen. And I think your analogy of the house building is really apropos of that. Is that if a person is part of the process all the way along, they're going to be much more able to understand when something goes wrong in the future, what potentially caused that, and be able to fix it, or at least be able to understand it well enough to get somebody to fix it for them, whether it's a consultant or a volunteer or whatever.
Ryan, I could nerd out about this for a long time, just even talking about legacy migrations. I mean, there's a whole bunch of other topics that I had kind of earmarked that we would cover, and we're running out of time at this point. So I want to thank you so much. What does the future look like for you in terms of the short-term future? Where would you like to see yourself in a few years, outside, of course, data migrations in general, or just in the general sense? Where would you see yourself?
This Salesforce consultant role is very new to me. I spent 20 years in the nonprofit sector in leadership and program management, and at least for the short term, I am loving my consultant role and loving that. And so, I am looking forward to continuing the work in the nonprofit sphere and helping nonprofits through their Salesforce work. So yeah, I think I see I'm very happy with my current trajectory for now.
Awesome. So listen, this has been great. Where can people find more about you?
I think the best place is to probably sign up for our Arkus newsletter. We have a lot of good information that comes out there, and I have a bunch of blogs in draft form that will be coming out around different elements of flow and trying to understand the elements of flow. So if you go to arkusinc.com, you can sign up for our newsletter there, and that's probably the best way to do that. I am shamefully not very active in the social sphere except on LinkedIn. You can always look me up there, but that's about the best place.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Alex.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.